Ars Libri is an everyman's journey, book by book, through Western literature. We read, retell, and reclaim our rich heritage. Be sure to subscribe to the show at arslibri.substack.com. Welcome back to Ars Libri. This episode, we're going to be looking at C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength. I'm joined once again by Jordan Kirk, who joined me last time to talk about the whole trilogy. This time we're going to focus just on the third book of the trilogy, That Hideous Strength. Jordan, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again.
Thanks for having me, Thomas.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So Jordan is a farmer. He's an engineer. He lives in Texas. I think that's West Texas. Is that correct? Or
yes, sir.
Yeah, different than East Texas. The flora and the fauna change pretty dramatically. Jordan is a family man as well, and he's a fan of C.S. Lewis. He's got a lot of reading under his belt. He's going to help me and all of us think through this book, That Hideous Strength. It's the third novel in Lewis's space trilogy. It was published in 1945, a big year for world history. The first two books were Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra. And those two books are straightforward planetary adventures with theological undertones. But this one, That Hideous Strength, shifts, and it's just on Earth. And it's sort of a dystopian thriller. It has Arthurian legend woven into it, supernatural horror, scientific, bureaucratic concerns, domestic drama, and even some gender and marital issues. So it's kind of an all-in-one, all-encompassing story. C.S. Lewis actually called it a modern fairy tale for grown-ups. Interestingly enough, modern fairy tale, it's not something you think of when you think of a fairy tale. You think maybe a little mermaid swimming under the sea. You think of little gnomes and dwarves and things, but this is a more serious fairy tale for grown-ups, he says. So here's what we're going to do in this episode. I'll go over the plot real quickly, and then I'll let Jordan take us where he thinks best to talk about some of the themes, characters, the influence, the importance of the book. We'll dig in deeper. So here's the overview of the book. If you haven't read it, no spoilers. The story starts in a small English university town shortly after World War II. And there's a young academic couple, Mark and Jane Studdick. And they find that their lives are being pulled in different directions. The husband is going one way with his career, and the wife is going a different way with some mysterious things happening to her. Mark, the husband, is an ambitious, but he's sort of insecure. He's a sociologist, and he gets drawn into something called the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments. National Institute for Coordinated Experiments. Sounds really boring, okay? But don't run away yet, because this is important. It's called the NICE, N-I-C-E, the acronym. It's a government bureaucratic thing. Very important in this story. And this institute seems to be progressive. It seems to be scientific. It's an organization that's wanting to remake society through coordinated planning, through things like social engineering and controlling nature and humanity with science and bureaucracy and experts. Jane, the wife, she, meanwhile, is having these vivid dreams. And it turns out that they're somewhat prophetic dreams. She dreamed about things that start to happen in real life. And she's nervous, she's afraid. She finds some help with this community of supposedly Christians, or at least you can feel like it's a welcoming community of good people who want the best for her. And it's led by Dr. Ransom, who is the hero from the first two books, Dr. Ransom. And he has a wound from his time on Venus. He's now known as the director, and he's known by some other names that are pretty interesting as well, some mythological names in this book. Both sides, the nice side and this Christian group of more humbler, welcoming people, they both race to contend against each other. One side is trying to control humanity and kind of remake the world, and actually vice versa. One side is trying to control the world and remake humanity. And Nice turns out to be this dark front for supernatural forces. It turns out it's not just scientists or academics and professors. These people are actually led by demonic forces, fallen angels and fallen demons and things. And they use technocratic language, they use bureaucracy, they use vivisection on humans to do these dehumanizing experiments, and they use cliquish means, manipulation. And Dr. Ransom's side aligns with the benevolent planetary spirits and angels. And they use these cosmic powers to have this final cataclysmic confrontation. And that's the two main stories that are happening and two main plots that are working. And the novel interweaves all of this with the Studdock's marriage, which has some ups and downs, and this sort of cosmic national struggle between evil forces and good forces. I won't tell you how it ends, but there's a lot here, and Christians consider this prophetic, foresighted, profound, even though the book is a little less adventurous than the first two. I like the adventure, personally. But this one has a lot of meaning, and it makes you stop and think. In fact, this is the novel form of C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man. The Abolition of Man is an argument that modern science and modern ways of thinking is destroying man. It's abolishing man. And we sort of try to transcend men, humanity. And Lewis writes that into a story called That Hideous Strength. So Jordan, that's an overview of the story. There's a lot here to unpack. Can you steer us in a direction to get us going with diving in deeper?
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think, when we ended the last episode, we had touched on this book, and the theme I think that stuck with me, if you were trying to, take a theme that carries throughout, on all of the topics you touched on: science, politics, marriage. I think it's basically to judge a book by its cover. If we were going to use, just a common saying, but I think it's maybe to judge rightly, and, beware the company you keep. Bad company corrupts good character. And, reading it back through it again, because I read it back in, I guess, September, October when we last talked. I was much more struck by it, because I think the first time through, I was really skipping over a lot of the in-between stuff and more focused on the narrative, just the story, which, as you said, this isn't much of an adventurous book. It's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of thought-provoking statements and a lot of espionage and just and corruption and so I tended to skip over a lot of the stuff, a lot of the in-between stuff, and just kind of catch the high level and that narrative of, all right, well, how are the good guys going to win, or how is Mark going to win? Because, Mark is probably, I guess, he's the main character in a sense. Him and Jane are both main characters, because sometimes it's written from both perspectives. And I think, you want Mark to succeed. And at first that means getting in at this little college. And then, he gets into the progressive element, which is sort of who actually runs the college. And then getting into the nice, which, as we talked about last time, was sort of Orwellian before, and it predated Orwell. And I guess it was something that was going on then, and as we know, is definitely going on now. And so you want Mark to win, you want Jane to win, but they don't know what that means. And I think that's why this is this is truly a fairy tale. Because, I don't know if you saw that deal when Tolkien went to the movies and he saw, I think it was Snow White, and he hated it. He hated it because it had been stripped.
Really?
It had been stripped of its fairy tale-ness. It had been stripped of the the bad. It was just all good and light and airy and just and a feel good. And Tolkien said that's not a fairy tale, and this truly is. There's so much, you want him to win, and yet you don't know what the end goal is. You're like, yeah, I want him to get a good salary at the NICE and be able to have a family that his wife doesn't really want, and that he probably doesn't really want because he never sees her. He's just always gone trying to work, and you're like, yeah, but he's got to do it. And then at some point, those lessons start coming to the front. Like, wow, what is really more important? And it's all through. I think C.S. Lewis wrote it in his world, which is colleges and these meetings, and I think he even said if he would have been in a different profession, the setting might have been a different profession. But he's like, this is the world I know. I can write about it well, and I could bring you into it and make you feel like it's where you're, where it's happening and authentically. And so I guess I touched on a lot there. Did any of that jump out at you?
Yeah, I think one thing you said is important to start the novel. The main character doesn't know where he's working. Like, Mark doesn't know he's getting invited to work for this National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, but he doesn't even understand. It's not clear what's happening. It's very vague. It's very cliquish. The authority structure, who's in charge, how much you're getting paid, what you're actually supposed to do when you start working there, what the Institute is actually doing. All of that is very vague, and it's different. Like, if you were to go work for a construction company, if you were to start working at a McDonald's or something, you know exactly who the manager is, you know who the foreman is, you know what you're being asked to do. They're going to tell you how much you're getting paid. You know what the company does. It'll say something like Wilson HVAC Company. Like, HVAC, okay, we're installing air conditioners and heaters and stuff. That's what we're doing.
Right.
But in this academic setting, in this bureaucratic setting, in this tech scientific setting, the layers are so thick that everything is ambiguous and nobody knows who's in charge. Nobody knows how much you're getting paid. Nobody knows what exactly you're doing. And I think that is exactly what bureaucracy feels like. Nobody knows who's in charge. Nobody knows what we're doing. Nobody knows whether I'm even hired or not, right? The process for even getting hired. And so he moved, but everybody knows you better be on your best behavior. And you better make a good impression with this guy and with that guy. And you go talk to that guy, and that guy doesn't know what's going on either. He's just trying to make sure he's in good relationships with everybody else so that he's welcomed into the circle. Oh, it's this cliquish inner circle. And I can tell you, Jordan, I don't know your entire, life background here, but
yeah,
I worked in the sort of a hands-on field for a while, and then I went to school. Then I went to the academic world.
Yes.
And the academic world, it is exactly like Lewis is describing, where you don't know what we're doing here. Nobody knows what this institution is actually supposed to. And it's all about impressing people and networking and kind of shuffling around. And am I really invited, or are you not? And is anybody getting paid here? And yeah. And it just feels like I have no idea what's going on, and nobody does. And you're just supposed to shut up about it and go along because this is the most advanced thing ever. This is progressive. We're changing the world here. We are influential and powerful. And that is exactly what it feels like to be in some of the snootier, more highbrow, academic, professional settings. It's a bureaucracy. It's perfect how he describes it.
Yeah.
And that's Mark entering into the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments.
Right, and that was his introduction. And I actually, I got a quote from that point because I thought it perfectly described it. He's meeting with the deputy director of the NICE and the NICE. Again, Orwellian. And he's being very direct, and he's trying to get like, all right, what is my job? And the guy's just beating around the bush and avoiding ever saying anything direct. And finally he realizes it. And then at one point it says, Mark did not ask again, because a perfectly direct question would have sounded a crudity in that room, a crudity which might suddenly exclude him from the warm and almost drugged atmosphere of vague yet heavily important confidence in which he was gradually being enfolded. So it was like he felt like he was being brought in, but he's like, and yet I still don't know what I'm doing. And I thought that was just perfect. Heavily drugged atmosphere.
Right. And he didn't want to ask a direct question. That's the thing I want to say. Not everyone and not everywhere, but in the academic, professional, bureaucratic world, a lack of directness and frankness is par for the course. If you are direct and frank and ask straightforward questions to people, it's seen as rude and off-putting. And you just kind of have to hint and suggest and keep quiet and keep your head down. I mean, there's a scene in the book where they're all eating lunch at the the sort of a pre-gathering meeting, and they're all eating lunch at some place. And Mark is trying to feel people out. He's like, so what do you do? Are you the main guy in charge? And they're all like, what? You know, they're like, don't ask me questions. I'm just here. My field of study is this narrow thing. And you need to talk to so-and-so and leave me alone. And it takes a long time for him to figure out what is going on. In fact, this is what has to happen for the reader too. The reader doesn't know what's going on. And Mark just thinks, and he's being told this is a good career move for him and that he needs to make a good impression. And that goes on for a while. And it just lends this aspect of a bureaucratic affair that is overly complicated. But what you do know the whole time is that the NICE has all the funding, all of the power. It's going to change the nation. It's going to change humanity. We're going to wipe away the old way of doing things, whether it's just pure academic, like for the philosophical inquirer, you know, or it's a tradition or myth or superstition. We're going to wipe all that away, and a new humanity a new thing is happening here, and you need to be at the forefront of it. That's what we want you here for. And he keeps asking, okay, but what do you want me to do? And they're like, oh, well, surely, you know, that will be figured out, you know, at some point. But you are the man that we want. You need to be here. And he keeps asking, okay, but what do you want me to do? And why me? And they're like, oh, well, you know, that's to be determined. You know, surely you'll understand.
It's so funny too. Like, I mean, there are hints, and like you said, he's brought there by Lord Feverstone, who actually I meant to write his name down. He's from the first book, and it's like a little mention at the very beginning. You know, oh, Lord Feverstone, who used to be known as this, and so it's like that. This guy could be bad, possibly bad. Like, this is the fairy tale aspect of it. And yet this is the guy that Mark is trying to like buddy up to, like, hey, help me out. Oh, you were the one who spoke up for me to get me into Bracton College or whatever. And he's like buddying up to this guy, and you're rooting for him. That's why I think it's so truly a fairy tale, and why C.S. Lewis is so awesome. You want him to do well, and yet doing well is obviously bad. And at that point you're talking about, I wrote down another quote, like Bill Hengist, William Hengist or whatever, who has a short departure after this, and then another departure after that. You know, he's one of the only people in that NICE when he comes in that will speak direct, that will go straight to the point. He's like, oh, you're sociology. You need to talk to that guy. And then he goes to that guy, and that guy's like, oh, no, not me. And it's back to Bill. And Bill's, you know, just cutting straight into the point. And I wrote down like 2 or 3 Bill quotes, but I was going to read one of them.
Go ahead, man.
Yeah, he's like, you haven't told me why you're leaving. Because Bill's like, I'm not staying here. And he's just the only one who's just clear cut and dry, you know. He says, well, it all depends what a man likes. If you enjoy the society of that Italian eunuch and the mad parson and that Hardcastle girl, her grandmother would have boxed her ears if she were alive. Of course, there's nothing more to be said. I suppose it's hardly to be judged on purely social grounds. I mean, it's something more than a club. Anyway, he just, he cuts straight to it. And the Hardcastle girl is the fairy. And she's just this police woman. He's like put off by her, and yet he like has to buddy up to her because she kind of speaks direct, but it's very, it puts him off. And I wrote down one quote about her. He said, "Before now, Mark had shuddered at the clumsy efforts of the emancipated female to indulge in this kind of crude humor, but his shudders had always been consoled by a sense of superiority. This time he had the feeling that he was the butt. This woman was exasperating male prudery for her diversion." So like the only other person speaking directly was this like disgusting woman, and who always chewed on a cherry root or whatever, and odd, and we learned later just kind of the enforcing arm of a lot of just the violence and the crazy stuff.
Right. So the main theme we're talking about here is bureaucratic evil. People think that power, so this is written in 1945, right? So you're thinking, okay, probably every novel written was about Hitler, right? It was about this big, obvious, tyrannical power that was going to come crush everybody. Well, Lewis is not writing like that. The worst characters, it's not like some evil villain who's wanting to take over the world. It's this one guy. Rather, it's this bureaucracy, and everything's vague.
Yes.
And most of the people there are very soft and pushy and doughy. I mean, not pushy. They're easy to be pushed around is what I mean. Everything is spoken in euphemisms. There's this sort of committee language, committee speak, and an endless layer of things where you don't know who is actually in charge. And so they're all non-committal, and truth is eroded, and accountability is dispersed among people. So you can't, like if you have a king and he's a tyrant, if you have Nero, or if you have a tyrant like let's say Napoleon or Stalin or something, you can assassinate that guy and get rid of him, and the tyranny's over. But if you have a bureaucracy, what do you attack? It's this blob, and you're not even sure where the blob starts and where it ends. So I guess what Lewis is saying here is that evil isn't always this cartoonish thing, right? That's easily depicted like, oh, it's that guy. What Lewis is painting here, I think is more accurate, at least for today. We have a sort of diffused, ambiguous power structure that you can't just alter or abolish. It's difficult to do this. And it's mundane, by the way. It's very mundane. It's careerist. And it's seductive. It draws you in. It offers you power. And that's why I think a lot of people, how they talk about the left had the long march through the institutions? Like they long marched through the institutions and then took stuff over. Well, let's just do that again. Why don't we just long march back? Well, the reason why it's difficult to do that is because these institutions will draw you in and offer you, just like with Mark, they'll come on in. We need you in here. Here's a bunch of money. Here's a bunch of power. Here's friendships. Here's influence. Here's an office. Here's a title. So long as you just do whatever we want you to do. And you think, I'm going to get in there and march through it and eventually take it over. But in reality, this thing kind of sucks you in and absorbs you. And many Christians, I think, see this today in institutional life. There's like corporate HR language everywhere. You can get kicked off of social media because you violated community policies. Like, what is that? Well, they won't tell you. Do you see how ambiguous it is? And who determined that? And what did I do? They won't tell you. You just need to go. The academic postmodern relativism, media spin, and progressive power structures and things, all this rhetoric used to control people and justify punishing dissent, right? And the sort of inner ring also, There's an inner ring. You got to get inside. You don't even know where the ring is really, but you got to get in. So it shows how people who are driven by ambition and social belonging are the very people who get sucked into this sort of moral compromise without even noticing it. And before you know it, they're participants in this big institution that's harming people, that's wanting to, drive change and override human freedom. Yeah, I saw this during COVID, man. I don't know where you were during COVID, but people I was hanging out with a lot, we were all reading books by Lewis and things like this. And I remember when COVID hit, this is exactly what happened. A bunch of people who care about you, who want your safety. We want to immunize humanity from danger, from fear, from ill health. Don't you care? Don't you love your neighbor? Wear the mask. Get the jab. This is about love. This is about kindness and compassion. Get the jab, right? And don't you want to belong? Well, then wear the mask. It's a signal. You can show everybody your virtue and your social belonging. And I kept thinking, you people are turning into the NICE organization. This is the NICE all over. This is a perfect depiction of what Lewis wrote 80 years ago at that time.
Yes, man, your little diatribe there got me thinking about a whole lot of other things in the modern world that I probably won't get into, but it's just so prescient. But I'm reminded as you're going on that's why I'll ground it in this book, because otherwise I'll probably go off on a tear. That's why this is such a great fairy tale, because who do we have in this mansion or whatever, just down the way, not that far away, is the resistance. It's Ransom and his acolytes, and they are a ragtag bunch. And Jane gets in with them, almost by God's will, by dreams, by being just brought in because she's seeing things before they happen, and she doesn't. And it's also having coming back to her femininity. It's almost as hard as saying an enemy. Her femininity and what it means to be a woman, and what it means to kind of embrace who she is and how God made her to be. And also this gift of seeing things and before they happen, and it kind of becomes a help. But it truly is. It's when and another lesson from that, I think, is that you have, like, in a fairy tale is always good versus evil, right? That's and who wins,
right?
A fairy tale is maybe it can be tragic, it could be a tragedy, and it could have a moral, but it usually has a good ending, or at least it shows truth. And I got a quote on that from Hingist as well. I'll go back to in just a second, but it kind of makes me think this, and I'm probably going to keep coming back to this. Sorry if I sound like a broken record, but what a tree should be known by its fruit. And if you think you're on the right side, look around you and see the way that people are going about winning battles, whether it be, in your own life, in business, in school, if you're, using AI to try and pass a test, which I guess is probably happening way more, all the time. Maybe they're clamping down on it. I don't know. Or if your victories come from deception, from lying, from double crossing, from betrayal of who you think are your allies,
right?
You're not on the right side, and the people that are surrounding you, if they keep doing that, even if maybe it's to other people, maybe it's not to you, recognize that if they have no qualms doing that to them, to others, they will have no qualms in doing that to you. And that's that. So before Hinge's departure, Hingist, I think is his name. He says him and Mark are going back and forth, and Mark says, "I suppose there are two views about everything." Two views? There are a dozen views about everything until you know the answer. Then there's never more than one. But it's no affair of mine. Good night. I thought that was great. I mean, not because I think it harkens. It's truth with a capital T. It's Sunday school answer. It's Jesus. But anyway,
you're talking here about truth and about seeking what's right and betrayal and things. And one of the things that happens in this bureaucratic vagueness is that who your friends are and who they're not becomes vague in those circles. What you're doing and what you're not doing becomes vague. Who's in charge, who's not. And then right and wrong becomes blurred as well. But let's go back to Jane, if you don't mind, because you mentioned Jane.
Yes.
So Mark gets involved in the nice, and while he's doing that, Jane, his wife, she's his wife. She's also professional, but she starts having these dreams, and they're disturbing because they're kind of crazy and not sadistic, but just almost demonic, like dreams where she's seeing people get beheaded and somebody's dead, but they're not dead, and crazy stuff happens, and she wants help. And so she goes to try to find help, but at the same time, she also starts to have questions about her place as a wife, maybe even as a future mother. She's not a mother yet, and as a woman. And so that dynamic is very interesting. Can we talk about that a little bit?
I had a quote on that too. There was several little spots in there where I was, is she's fighting instinct, basically. She's fighting the God-given desires to try and fit it to the mold of this modern, just to use a technical term. Sorry. I tend to be too much of a jokester sometimes. So on page 71, even when she had discovered that she was going to marry Mark, if he had asked her, the thought, "But I must still keep my own life," had arisen at once, and had never for more than a few minutes at a stretch been absent from her mind. Some resentment against love itself, and therefore against Mark for thus invading her life, remained. She was at least very vividly aware of how much a woman gives up in getting married. Mark seemed to her insufficiently aware of this. Who'd have thunk it? Of course, a man is insufficiently aware. Wow. And oblivious and blissful in the
Oh gosh.
Though she did not formulate it, this fear of being invaded, I love the way he writes, and entangled was the deepest ground of her determination not to have a child, or not for a long time yet. One had one's own life to live.
Yeah, man.
The reason why that stuck out to me so much because it's very modern, very very feminist, and it really cuts through to why it's really anti-Christian. The man belongs to the wife and the wife to the man, right? And even as Christians, you're not your own. You were bought. You're bought at a price. So it's just very, and it's a fairy tale, right? It's satanic even, it's subversive. And it's funny how as she, returns to her God-given nature and, sometimes through these supernatural type things that are happening to her, she's fighting to return to that, odd, mindset that has been forced on her. And there's a quote when she's talking to Miss Dimble. I don't know if I wrote that one down. Where she basically says, I'm afraid I don't believe that sort of thing, as they're talking about coincidence and basically God. And she says, your upbringing makes it natural that you should not. Just very direct, right? Directness is next to godliness. That's my next quote. I think it's cleanliness is the Southern ism. But could this old woman have some idea? A thought crossed Jane's mind. Could this old woman have some idea that one ought not to call even one's remote ancestors liars? Talking about in that sense, talking about dreams. But I don't know. I know all the other things you do in your different podcasts and different works and things. You also talk about that ancestral calling and just those things that they kind of get passed down and as a people, not just as a Christian people, but even as a particular people. And that's sort of the convergence of all those things. Her desire to not be feminine, to not be a woman, and then even to the point of rejecting, kind of her heritage, and
right.
The woman who is supposed to be interpreting these dreams and helping her is just kind of like, you were raised to not be this way. Like it's, that's the only reason.
Right. You've been conditioned to think this way. It just occurred to me that one of the main themes in this book is transhumanism, the abolition of man, abolishing man, and the nice is doing it in their way. But here is Jane doing it in her way too. She's abolishing what it means to be a woman.
Yes.
I mean, she's basically abolished what it means to be a human being in the sense of we don't belong to ourselves. We belong to our Lord. The body is for the Lord, the Bible says. You belong to him.
Yeah.
He bought you with a price. He created you.
Preach.
He's your maker. You belong to him. Then he redeemed you. You doubly belong to him. But then you get married, okay, and you belong to your spouse now.
Yes.
And this is a two-way thing, by the way, okay? There's a sense in which, there's male headship and all this too, but there's, the man is not free to just go off and do whatever he wants now. He has to take care of his wife.
His duty.
And love her in an understanding way, the Bible says.
Yes.
And as Christ loved the church. But, and vice versa. She has duties to him. But what Jane is doing is she's wanting to be this individual that owns herself.
Right.
And nobody else owns her, not even a child. So it's not just about her husband. It's about anybody. Nobody is going to have any demands on me at all, except, of course, my boss, right? Because you got to have a job. If you're going to live that way, you're going to have a job, which means you're going to then do whatever you're. So it's like, are you really free? But anyway, that's a sort of abolition in itself, the abolition of woman. And she has to walk that back throughout the novel. She has to unlearn the propaganda that she's been fed, which is that you are completely your own. I mean, this is kind of implied in what happens in the garden when Satan tempts Eve and says, you can be like God. You can do whatever you want. You are your own person. Don't listen to God. Don't, hide behind your husband as he protects you like you're some damsel in distress. You're your own person. You do you. You figure out life for you. You can be like God. Basically, what is God? He's independent, self-sufficient. He's on his own. And he's wise and powerful. And so she has to learn to walk that back. And what's interesting to me, too, is that this is 1945, man. This isn't 2026. This isn't the 21st century. It's not the 1960s. Not the sexual revolution yet, even, in America. This is 1945, man. Women have been thinking like this for quite a while. You can find hints of it going back even before the modern period, but this is something that's been perhaps in the heart of woman, if not also in the heart of man, but it's been in the heart of woman for a long time. And so you've got this really important sub-theme in the story, which Lewis didn't have to write this into the story, right? The story about nice and about good versus evil could have gone on without this subplot about Jane, but it plays a role in the end, which I won't get to no spoilers for the listeners here, but man, it's really good in how it comes back around in the end and works out. And I think it's important, though, because there's sort of this redemption of humanity in the end that involves Jane redeeming her womanhood in every single way. Femininity, womanhood, wife, and other ways as well.
Yes. You know, I think if I can relate something back to the garden, in some way, it's almost like, it's lazy, but I'm like, yep, that's satanic. That's satanic. That's my go-to, but I think Lewis did it in such a, it wasn't a ham-fisted, just kind of, oh, yep, here's a compare. I mean, it was, I think it was so subtle even that maybe I didn't notice it necessarily, until you pointed it out. I mean, that's the abolition of woman. That's really good. And I think the thing I'm reminded of that I come back to in all these things, with you're not your own. You belong to Christ. You're not your own. You belong to your spouse. And that goes for husband and wife. It's not just the husband owns the wife and she doesn't own him. It's mutual. But it's also, there's that duty and there's that hierarchy. I think that maybe we talked a little bit about last time. And there's a really interesting part where Jane meets, Ransom, who's mostly referred to as the director throughout the whole book. And then there's hints, that, oh, he's got a bad leg. What happened? Well, he got hurt in the last book in Paralandra, killing that dude. And but it's funny, like I think he even reminds her, like she's enamored by him. She has this even attraction to him. And to end their meeting, he basically is like, you need to obey your husband, in a sense. So talks about in marriage, you have your role. And he reminds her of that. And she's just like, what? It's not at all the direction she thought it was going. And he reminds her of her duty. And I think, as like you said, and our duty as men is not to run off and do whatever we want if we're the head of the household. We have that duty to die for our spouse, for our children, if necessary. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's that sign of okay, maybe I'm on the right side, because this guy isn't just telling me what I want to hear. He's not just saying, oh, hey, yeah, I'll help Mark get that job at the NICE, or why don't you just come stay with us? Forget your husband. He's absentee anyway, or he's not even really a good husband. He's like, go be obedient to this guy who's not even around right now, because that's your duty. And these hard truths, these difficult hard reminders are why it's okay. I mean, that's why this is a fairy tale, because it's grounded in tradition, and it's grounded in in that truth with a capital T. Yeah. There's a dozen answers until you know the answer, the right one, and then there's only one.
Right.
And it's like you should be reminded of what side you're on. Yeah. Go ahead.
A friend of mine recently said that stories like this have an abundance of moral clarity. An abundance of moral clarity. I thought that was a good phrase. So the fairy tale, there's a good side and there's a bad side. Right. People today like to blend all that and say, well, there's good on both sides and there's bad on both sides. That's just simply not how the Bible presents reality. A good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. That's Jesus, right? There's the sheep and the goats. There's the left side and the right side. There's heaven and hell. Yep. There's righteousness and wickedness. Yes, we fall short. And yes, sometimes we do try to, we live in between sometimes, but it's by fault. It's not by design. It's by our sin and failing, not by the way things are supposed to be. But anyway, this is an important point here with Jane, and she just detaches identity and sexuality and from all these other obligations. And one thing that stuck out to me as you were talking was, we have this duty to our children as well, to our parents.
Yes.
When people become, hard to handle or undeserving, they still require and demand like the rights of things. The duties are still there.
Yes.
When my children are throwing a fit, or when they scratch something that I just bought or just built. I just built a table, and my kid takes a knife to it and just kind of scratches it. And this rage comes up inside of me. And I think, okay, you have a duty to your child right now above this piece of wood. This inanimate object is not as valuable as this human being that belongs to you.
Okay, so this is one, man, I thought it was so good. And this might be just more for you. Just a question for you. This is Cromwell and Merlin. And have you heard of the Discarded Image? The C.S. Lewis book? It was the series of lectures on like medieval thinking and stuff.
Yeah.
So Merlin kind of is that, right? And there's a couple cool quotes about Merlin, and I didn't remember that from the beginning. Merlin is softly introduced, at the very beginning.
Right.
When they're talking about selling the wood, the Bragdon wood, right? And so Cromwell's major generals were sent to destroy the groves and the high places, which could be considered like pagan, And that would be a lot of people thought, well, Merlin, kind of a mixed bag there. And there was a guy from the college, and I think this is obviously fictional, but he would be a brave man who would accuse this guy who stood up to Cromwell's men, who would accuse him of popery or gentilism, because that's what they were kind of fighting back against. But his last words were, "Marry, sirs, if Merlin, who was the devil's son, was a true king's man as ever ate bread, is it not a shame that you, being but the sons of bitches, must be rebels and regicides?" And I think he was basically saying like, I think it was about loyalty. But I kind of wanted to ask you, because it was supposed to be like a turn of phrase a little bit, right? Like he's the son of the devil, you're son of a bitch. But he was a true king's man.
Yeah, talking about Merlin.
Are you going to be a rebel and a regicide? Like a king killer, I guess, right? Is what that means.
Yes. So, because Cromwell and his men, they fought against the king.
Yes.
They fought against the king, but Merlin supported the king in his day. Now you can say, well, the king in his day, first of all, it was mythical. It's Arthur. Did Arthur even exist? Right. But secondly, if he did exist, he was the best king that ever existed. He was the best.
Yes.
So it's easy to be loyal. It's easy to be loyal when the person you're loyal to is righteous and good and noble. But it's not easy to be loyal to monarchy when the king is this tyrant, or so you say, and then you kill the king. I mean, regicide. That's quite a feat, man. If your father is a bad father, do you kill your father? And then that's like this mythological problem, right? With I think it's Orestes, the trilogy of Orestes. Clytemnestra kills her husband Agamemnon, and then Orestes kills his mother for having killed his father. And then he has to flee because you killed your mom, dude. Like, well, I killed her, but she killed my father.
Damn.
It's like, yeah, but you killed your mom. Like, nobody's supposed to do that.
Yes.
And so he's unjust. Even though he had to avenge his father, he killed his mother. And so it's like, what is the right thing to do here? And I guess what Lewis is saying is, you guys don't have much to boast, because Merlin was a pagan, but he was loyal to the king.
Yes.
And loyalty to your authority. I mean, this is something that modern people don't like. They don't like.
Right.
We don't place a high value on loyalty to authority today. But if you read the Bible and if you read history, just all mythology, like Antigone wrestles with this question, and so does Orestes, the different plays in the Greek corpus, and all throughout medieval literature, loyalty to the king is tantamount to loyalty to God. Because it's not that the king is always right, it's that power comes from God, authority comes from God.
Yes.
And to rebel against authority is to rebel against God. But, Protestants, we don't like that. I know I'm talking here to, Protestants are like,
Yes.
no, resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. We got to rebel against, and look, that mentality transfers directly into, well, my husband's abusive, so I have a right to divorce him.
Right.
I mean, if you, me too. Believe all women. These sorts of movements. The children want to be emancipated from their parents, go their own way because their parents are heavy-handed. I mean, what justifies someone who's in subordination to authority rebelling against that authority? Well, today, I mean, anything really. Emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, right? I mean, so you have the same sort of mentality where if you're going to kill the king, what else are you capable of? I mean, everything flows from that. And so, Merlin was a pagan, but he had virtues that you don't have. And that's not just Lewis, man, by the way. I read that in so much Christian literature throughout the centuries. This is a book called Ludovico Ariosto's Orlando Furioso. It's an Italian novel in the 1400s.
Wow. And
Merlin is in that one. And every time Merlin pops up in Christian literature, he's like this transitory figure where there's this pagan world that's being overrun with Christianity, and Merlin has this pagan magic and connection, but he's a servant for God.
Right.
It's almost like, I'm not saying he is at any way Melchizedek in the Bible, but it's kind of like that, where it's this dude who's out there and he's a priest. And clearly he's not of the order of Aaron or Moses or the Old Testament or the Bible, but he recognizes God. It's almost kind of like Balaam or somebody who, he knows who the real true God is, right? Like Moses' father-in-law. He's not following the people of God. He doesn't have the 10 Commandments, etc. But he knows who the true God is, and he reverences him and worships him.
Yeah.
And he's also a priest.
Yeah.
That's Merlin.
Yeah, that's good. I kind of wanted to touch on it too because, thinking about the Protestant thing and Cromwell, my gut instinct is like, well, it's right, because I'm Protestant, but at the same time, I'm like, man, he was kind of an SOB, to quote Lewis there, which was such a great quote. That's such a great quote. But he, being involved a little bit in politics now, I feel kind of like, what was that, Erastes you said, who, to honor our father, we have to slay our mother, in a sense, because, if we're going to honor our grandfathers, then we have to differ with our fathers, because it's a very recent departure in the Western tradition. If you're following with my little analogy there with your story, but I feel like what you're touching on and sort of what we've decided, on our little political endeavors is that we need to honor both. And how do we do that? I quote this all the time to my guys and to my children, is 1 Timothy 5:1. Do not rebuke an elder man, but exhort him as a father. And that doesn't mean that you can't differ.
Yeah.
That means that, hey, on this, I'm gonna lift you up and say, great job. And then elsewhere, I'm not going to bash you. I'm just going to say, we're going to go this direction now. We're going to take it a different way. Yeah. And I think in doing so, we can remain just even in that transition. And I think it comes back to Merlin, because, another really cool quote talking about the British. This is where we kind of get into the discarded image a little bit, where Lewis writes about the way that stuff was, not transmuted, but like but brought down through time, maybe. Before literature, before reading, before writing, it was this savage. He called it savagery, and the way that it's reactionary. It's you do this, so I kill you, and then there's over time, and then with the introduction of Christianity to these people, there's this sense of a moral way, the right way, the capital T truth. Once you know the answer, there's actually only one. There's not a dozen. And Merlin just perfectly represents that. And I think it's his introduction of this topic, if I'm making sense, into the discarded image, this medieval, savagery, is with Merlin. And we see that later when he wants to basically kill Jane because of like an offhand comment she made. And yet he served Arthur, and he was a druidical kind of guy, the Druids, this pagan kind of thing. And the quote I wrote down is about Arthur, and one can imagine a man of the old British line, but also a Christian and a fully trained general with Roman technique, trying to pull this whole society together and almost succeeding. And then skipping down a little bit, always that undertow, that tug back to Druidism. And where would Merlin be? He's a really interesting figure. He's not evil, yet he's a magician. He's obviously a druid, yet he knows all about the Grail. Anyway, so it's like that. It's that loyalty to the truth, maybe even when you yourself are not completely right. And I don't know, maybe I kind of lost my train of thought there, but basically just this, like you said, it's that transitionary type figure, and Arthur was a full embodiment. I think Arthur is kind of the character that really, and it's a very small line, but it's like, it's this very British, and I think when C.S. Lewis talks about the early British, it was like savage. And yet he's very Christian and trained by the Romans. And, I think when people talk about that, they talk about the British when they became Christian. They didn't necessarily get rid of all their savagery in enforcing Christian morality. Sometimes it might have been pretty brutal, but was it still righteous, and was it still just? I don't know. There's a lot in there. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, but I loved that quote.
Yeah, it's hard to unravel all of this because Lewis weaves in Arthurian mythology to this story. And he even weaves in Arthur's father, Pendragon.
Yeah.
Uther Pendragon, I think it was, and Merlin. And so all of that comes back around because in the old mythology, Merlin and Arthur, both of them, did they die, or were they just kind of kept for a future time to come back one day when England finally needed them in the end? And that motif shows up very potently in the book. And so that's where we're talking. That's why we're talking about all this, because it's in the story. And in fact, Ransom's, one of his names in this story is now Pendragon. So
right.
I just let the reader have to figure out how that comes about, what happens there. But yeah, Merlin was loyal to King Arthur, and it was a loyalty that I think it was his duty as a priest to sort of usher in and help. I mean, look, in the story of Arthur, Merlin was actually the one who told the bishops what to do. Like, the bishops didn't know what to do. And so they came and consulted Merlin. So you got these Christian bishops interacting with this pagan druid priest guy, and they both kind of, interweave. And Merlin actually took the baby and had him baptized. Like, he didn't baptize him. He brought him to a friar to have him baptized, and then whisked him away to hide him for a while, and then brought him back so he could be king, so that he could be the first fully Christian king to usher in Christendom to England. Like, Merlin was doing all that, even though he himself wasn't a Christian in the proper sense. He wasn't of the apostolic order,
Yeah,
he's doing all this stuff, and it just shows that even if he did serve pagans, like demons and things like this, Lewis had a belief that, and I think we should too, that at very least, all things serve God's purposes, even the demons. Sometimes they do it unwittingly, but sometimes they may do it wittingly. I mean, there's instances in the Bible where there's a demon that God tells them, "Yeah, go and do this." It's I think they were going to deceive Ahaz or something in the Bible, and so there's this lying spirit that God sends. So that you have this weird interplay. Let's just put it that way. Even if we don't want to actually, hard purchase on that suggestion, there's an interplay here where the demons obey God, at least in his providence, in his sovereignty. And Lewis said, for instance, that the old pagan poets sometimes unknowingly spoke about things that God would himself do. But they spoke in riddles, and they spoke ignorantly. And yet later on, God would actually, commandeer their poetry and use it for his purposes.
So, kind of on this more science theme, he kind of bashes sociology, which is kind of funny, because I've heard people say that it's not real science anyway, and I guess C.S. Lewis maybe sort of agrees, or at least his character Bill Hengist doesn't agree or agrees. He says there are no sciences like sociology, and if I found chemistry beginning to fit in with the secret police run by a middle-aged virago, Virago, which I don't know that word, I didn't realize that, who doesn't wear corsets, and a scheme for taking away his farm and his shop and his children from every Englishman, I'd let chemistry go to the devil and take up gardening again. Because this is Hengist. He was, he's kind of referred to as being, like a serious scientist. And like, in the old way, and it's almost like brushed aside, like, yeah, we're not really like that anymore. It's almost like, yeah, we're not serious scientists anymore like that. And I thought, when you were talking about COVID, I was reminded of that same topic. It's like, what can we use it for to take away people's stuff, everybody's livelihood, everybody's even belongings in some cases, Anyway, I thought that was really cool.
No, man, I've thought about this a lot. In fact, since I was a child, I thought about this. I remember when I was in like 7th grade or something, I had to do a book report. And I chose the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright.
Yep.
And they did they built the first plane and flew it in the air and over there in was it Kitty Hawk? And so they're out there flying around, and I thought, this is just great. Planes are awesome. I love airplanes. And then I did a little more study, and I learned that like right after that, very, very soon after that, all of the Western world's generals, military commanders, were extremely interested in that airplane. They wanted to come see it. People came from all over and the people that came, it wasn't like enthusiasts. I mean, some people just like spectators, but it was generals. World War I kicked off not long after that, and that was the first use of airplanes. And what did we do with airplanes in World War I? We bombed each other. We were killing each other. This invention, this tool, science, the first thing we do with it, the first thing we do with this is kill each other with it. Now, I'm not saying planes are evil. Okay, I'm not saying the iPhone is evil. I'm not saying the internet and air conditioning and all this stuff are evil, but there is a sense in which man uses science to control man. Man uses technology to control man. That's like, as soon as some new invention comes, the first thing that's going to happen, at least maybe not the first, like soon though, it's coming. Control, right? Before the iPhone existed, when you left your house, your parents did not know where you were, right? It was glorious. You were free as a song. Okay, I mean, it was wonderful. And if you got lost, you were just lost, buddy. That was it. You had to figure out how to get home. And there's no Google Maps doing it. Now you got your phone, and you can find out where you are, but so can everybody else. Okay, there's control. And we all know social media, it's great. Hey, you can get online and speak your mind. And it's also a means of control, right? And we can foment revolution, let's say in Egypt or Libya, this Arab Spring or something, or we can shut it all down, turn it off, and you can't know anything or talk to anyone. So technology and science are ways of control. And we learned this early on. Some of the early philosophers said all this too. They said that when man manipulates nature, man manipulates himself because we're part of nature. So if we start to poison nature, let's say with chemicals or pollution, well, we get poisoned as well. Like we have plastic, inside of us. We have pollution inside. It's not just in the air or in the water. It's in us. It's not just in the cows and the fish. It's in us.
Right.
We did it to ourselves. And that's something that starts to happen in this book. You have science and technology and the abolition of man. We're abolishing man. We're controlling man. And it's not just control anymore, by the way. So Lewis, what he points out is we're not just controlling man. We're abolishing man. We're overcoming man. We're going beyond man, but in not a way that Nietzsche talked about, like becoming a Superman, but actually in destroying man. And in the end here, you got this undead thing that they're keeping alive that's actually demon possessed. And I think that's probably the end of it. Like Peter Thiel, for instance, this tech billionaire guy right now, what's he talking about all the time? Transhumanism. Like, what are other guys like him talking about? Tech bros, tech entrepreneurs. They're talking about, cycling out new blood with their old blood with new blood. Somehow babies are involved in all of this stuff in ways I don't even want to look into because it's horrific to even think about it. They're talking about living forever, doing things with DNA, gene splicing, and modifying and choosing what your baby's eye color and how tall they're going to be. Like, this is transhuman. You're tinkering with man. Maybe we can edit out the gene that is selfish and the gene that is, racist or something, the gene that is misogynist or greedy or whatever.
Mean.
You're basically changing things. So science isn't just about, like if you're young, like I was when I was in 7th grade, and I'm thinking just like, planes. Oh, this is so great. Like they just shot a rocket and NASA's going around the moon right now. I showed my children. Yeah. I'm like, this is awesome. Like I love this stuff. So science can be this wonderful, beautiful thing if you have a proper, take dominion and cultivate the earth, right? It doesn't say demolish the earth. That's not God. That's not the mandate, right? The mandate isn't obliterate everything and remake it. It's cultivate this thing. Push back the weeds and the thorns, at least after the fall, and make it beautiful, make it a habitable place. That's a healthy way of looking at nature. But, men who have avarice in their hearts or some kind of divine megalomania, maybe they're demon possessed. Lewis thinks they're demon possessed, right? These guys are actually possessed by demons who are doing this stuff. Mm. And that's the other thing too. The main message here from Lewis, I think, is the greatest evils today don't come from people like Donald Trump. Like this visible guy who some people think is a tyrant. That's not, it's actually people behind the scenes who are calm. Their hands are soft. Their faces are kind of pudgy. They've never been in a fight. I know a guy, I won't name him. I know a guy right now on Facebook. He's the most bellicose, warlike, bloodthirsty guy I've ever known personally in my real life. And I know for a fact he's never been in a fight. He's never been in a fight. He's never given or taken a punch. He's never defended anybody. He's never felt threatened in his life. But he is like a genocidal war hawk maniac calling in for the destruction of many people in this war right now that's going on. I'm like, that's the sort of people who are backroom keyboard warrior justifying the destruction of humanity for the betterment of progress and all kinds of things, man. It's the boring people. Like, it's mundane. It's people who are like, they're kind and compassionate and scientific. I have a degree in sociology. Do you? Right? I've studied global politics. I have a master's degree in, whatever. Like, okay, that doesn't qualify you to be a good human being. Right? It doesn't qualify you to not be demon possessed. So anyway, man, I'm babbling on here.
No, yeah, I could join the babble, but I think I would get too specific. I would start naming names, so maybe I shouldn't.
And I want to name this guy's name.
I was going to say Lindsey Graham. Tucker loves to,
that's
hammer
the kind of
Lindsey
guy.
Graham because he doesn't have any kids. He's probably a, sodomite, but he's probably the catcher, not the pitcher. But he's the one who, is just so willing to send everybody else's sons
It's that
off to
kind of
die.
guy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that kind of guy, man. His jawline is not at all aggressive or threatening. He's
like a
his shoulders
grandmother.
don't hunch forward. Yeah, he's never carried dumbbells or anything heavier than a sandwich. You know what I mean? Like, this guy is not at all this, but when you look at him and when you listen to him, he is basically the most bellicose, war hawk, world destroying, genocidal maniac you've ever met, ever. And without a flint, like, there's no moral tinge or twit. Like, his brow doesn't furrow when he calls for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people, at all. And you think this is, and he's calm, and his voice is somewhat high pitched, and it's this guy. This is the threat. This is the threat.
He's Weston from Paralandra. He's Weston.
Yes. Yes.
Just
right.
Satanic and just. Well, I said he sounds rational. He can sound. Unless you really listen to what he's saying, but he could sound very convincing.
Yeah, and that's what Lewis is pointing out in his book too. These guys who want to basically control and destroy the world. It's not like the movie series Avengers, for instance, or any kind of Superman movie or Spider-Man movie, right? The bad guy is clearly this insane, loud, powerful bad guy. And he's out there like destroying cities, just punching buildings. Clearly he's a bad guy. Yeah. He's got horns coming out of his head. But in reality, the people who are bad are people who are talking heads in the media, and they're wearing suits, and they smile, and they say it's for the good of humanity, that you should wear a mask, or that you should bomb school children halfway across the world. It's these people, and this is the thing Lewis points out, they use language. They manipulate the language to say whatever it is that they need to say, whatever formula that they need to utter to convince you. I just saw this in a different series. I don't get into anime much. And what I heard about this Japanese series called Frieren, it's like this elf girl who goes on adventures or something. Anyway, one of the adventures in that story is that she comes upon this town who has befriended some demons. And like, she, as an elf, she's like sworn to fight the demons, and she's like, what are demons doing here? And they say, no. The town says, no, it's okay. These demons are ambassadors from the local demon queen, and they're kind. They're here to dialogue. They're here to negotiate. It's all good. And then she has to tell them this lesson that she learned long ago, which is that demons in this cartoon world, okay, the demons, they don't use reason and truth and sincerity. They're not in earnest. Like, demons don't believe in anything. Like, the demons don't believe in feminism. The demons don't believe in Nazism or communism or socialism, or they don't believe in any. And they don't use reason. They use words. They use combinations of words to convince you, to give them power. That's what they do. That's all that the demons are doing. Whatever it is they say, like for instance, one guy in the show, he said he's going to kill the demon. He's like, I've had enough of you. I know that you're secretly evil. And he goes to kill him. And he says, my dad fought your dad. He fought demons long ago in the former war. And the demon says, my dad also fought humans long ago. I think it's time we put away our swords. I'm also tired of fighting. Well, in reality, that's a lie. Demon didn't have a father. They don't have fathers. He's completely lying. He's just making up words to convince you not to fight him and to give him power, to open your gates and let more of his kind come in so they can destroy you. That's what they're doing. And I think that's what these people do in the NICE, the NICE. That's what these technocrats and bureaucrats and this like cult of scientism does. They're not actually concerned with truth. They're not actually concerned with reason. They're using words to try to convince you to believe what their cause is, to believe their cause, to give them power, to let them control you. As soon as you do that, then they're going to do whatever they want. Right? It's kind of like politicians when they'll say anything on the campaign trail. Yeah, we're going to build that wall. Yeah, we're going to take down the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp. And then, okay, I'm going to vote for this guy. And then you give him power, and then they just do whatever they want. They don't fulfill any of their promises. That's how these people use, that's demons, that's the bureaucracy, that's the technocracy, that's the NICE in Lewis's novel. Now, that's exactly the world we live in today.
And to, continue off of that, often they're using our very own, they're weaponizing, our beliefs against us. That's Mark's entire job. He's supposed to write, propaganda, and they put it out because they own all the newspapers. They put it out and people start thinking, oh, this is actually a good thing, and it's funny, a topic that's been on everybody's tongue for the last 10 years because of Trump is immigration and how do we, how do we think about this? What are our categories for this? And in C.S. Lewis' book, the foreigners are the Irish, these foreign workers who are brought in to destroy everything, and they're crass and they're crude and they're so different, and now we see like the difference in the Irish and the English is actually similar. And Lewis made this strong distinction, that, and now we have cultures from other sides of the world colliding in our modern day and age, and still Christians, some in earnest, some who maybe just be Christian in name, will weaponize pseudo-Christian propaganda to prevent us from doing what is just and what is right, and actually loving our neighbor, and loving the foreigner too. But recognizing that there is a distinction there.
Yeah, there's a lot of this going on today, man. There's a lot of this. People will use Christianity, and this is something people have said, that radicals they'll gut your institution and wear it like a skin suit. And they'll do this to anything. They'll do this to video games. They'll do this to football. They'll do this to education. They'll do this to churches, to marriage. They'll do this to whatever. And before you know it, this is not like a wolf in sheep's clothing. This is like a wolf in sheep's clothing situation where, hello, my fellow Christians. Hello, my fellow men. Hello, my fellow dads, my fellow football enjoyers, whatever. These people will take your religion and say things like, hey, Jesus was an immigrant, so we have to accept, Jesus was whatever. The Apostle Paul thought this, so you have to do this to your whole country. The kingdom of heaven, this is one thing I like, they'll say that we can't have a national Christian politics here because that would be oppressive. However, the kingdom of heaven is a place that welcomes all ethnic people. So America has to welcome all ethnic people. It's like, wait a second, are we going to adopt Christianity for our politics or are we not? In the one case, you're not supposed to, but in the other case, you are. Well, what's the consistency? People will say that's contradictory, right?
Right.
And well, for them, it's not, because they're just using words to get you to give them power.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get what they want. That's all they're doing. And that they're being consistent. right? In that, they're being consistent. They will always say whatever they need to say, any combination of words. So someone said also, like when you argue with certain people, you're not arguing with them, but with the TV,
Right.
and the TV doesn't listen to you and doesn't care.
Yep.
It's sort of the same thing. When you're arguing with demonic forces, so to speak, at least in the book Nice, you're not arguing with people. You're arguing with these sort of irrational forces that aren't listening to you. They're just throwing, it's almost like, I thought this earlier. There's one guy I know online. He talks a lot. He types voluminously, and there's no way you can argue against him because he'll just keep arguing against you. And I thought, what you should do is just screenshot what he says, throw it in AI, and just say, AI, refute this, and just post it back to him, and just keep doing that endlessly. Just like my AI will refute your autistic, hyperactive brain. But that's what happens in Paralandra, when what's that demon-possessed guy talks to the green girl?
Yep. Weston.
And
yep,
he argues with her. He at some point, the arguments are clearly he's just trying to destroy her. But the fact that he just never gives up, he never tires, he keeps arguing forever and ever and ever, eventually he wins. And Ransom recognizes this, and he realizes, I can't keep arguing with this guy. I need to use force. I just need to beat his, rear end. And so he does. And I wonder if Lewis actually, really thought all of that through, because what he's saying is at some point you stop arguing with evil.
Right.
You destroy it.
Right.
You don't argue with it. This is not a rational dialogue between two good faith, honest people. You destroy it. Like when Satan rebelled against God in heaven, he did not have a dialogue with the archangel Michael. There wasn't a dialogue. There was war, and he was cast out of heaven, and he fell from heaven like lightning, Jesus said.
Yep.
So that's how we have to treat evil as well. This whole neutral playing field of open dialogue, and it assumes good faith, and we're all just seeking reason. Elon Musk talks like this, right? Like everybody's just like pursuing what's rational and figuring out what's true. No, not everybody's doing that, right? Jesus is the truth, and not everybody's seeking him. Even Pilate, he said, what is truth? Pilate didn't care for the truth. So anyway, that's a big theme here in Lewis's story. I'm getting off my rant here.
Yeah, well, I think, I was going to say, I think just to kind of tie that rant up or whatever, but it's very Christian. To me, it's not only like if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your hand, cut it off. But I think it's like, how do we deal with, even with sinners in our own, bodies, in our own congregations, is, at a certain point, after multiple confrontations individually and with groups, you hand them over to Satan. You kick them out, you get rid of them. And, I think the apostate brother, the maybe it is a brother, maybe it's not, but we're not doing them any favors by entertaining their deception and their dishonesty and their lies. If they deny Jesus right. As the Son of God, even, they're not our brother. They and lying to him about that. Oh, well, it's okay. We can't put up with that. And I think that's seen throughout. It's just that firmness, that strength. And I think the director exemplifies that in this book, even when he's, got a limp, he can't even barely walk. He still exemplifies this strength, and this gentle but very firm way that he deals with people. And I think, that's the fairy tale-ness of it. It's not
right.
Would you say it brings moral clarity? Clarity. It's not what you always want to hear, but it's what we need to hear. And sometimes that's a hard lesson to learn.
Well, Jordan, we can keep talking about this, man. And there's a lot in the book. I would recommend people read it. I think you can read this book without having read the first two. It's
I
helpful to have
agree.
read the first two.
It stands alone. And it almost, reading this again without reading the first two prior, it almost feels like the other two could be prequels in a sense. Like this was supposed to be the capstone in a sense, even though the other two books are great in their own way. It completely stands alone, and the others are just sort of like side quests or, little prequels, in a sense.
Yeah, this is, because the ending especially is like a crescendo.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing I would say too, is if you do read the book, just know that it starts off slow, but it picks up and it dramatically escalates. So if you feel like this is slow and it doesn't feel like a fairy tale, just stick with it. And it builds and builds and builds, and it builds exponentially. So take your time, enjoy the book, probably read it a few times because it's sort of prophetic.
It is. And I do think it's not, to me, it's like an older movie. Movies used to really build tension, and they'd really build characters. And now it's just this thing, this thing, this thing, this thing. This feels like a slow build into a climax, into a rolling, narrative until it really becomes like, it does suck you in eventually, but there's all this backstory leading up. And so you kind of have to go into it with that in mind, that it's a build, it may slow out of the gate for sure, just a little bit.
Yeah, it's like a train, or it's like my Land Cruiser. Slow out of the gate, but eventually get up to speed. And when it does, it's rolling, and it's good.
That's good.
All right, Jordan. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your insights, man. And maybe for different books in the future, we can have you on again. So thank you.
That'd be awesome, man. Thanks for having me.